Hey, this is Christian Buckley with Collab Talk. We got a couple guests here today.
Hey, my name is Matt Wade. I'm the Cloud Services Lead at H3 Solutions in Massachusetts.
Howdy, my name is Mick Herres. I'm the EVP Technology co-founder of H3 Solutions.
Clarify that.
Great to have you guys here. And I know that we've talked about a couple things that we're going to cover. You guys are doing some interesting things. And Matt, you are becoming a little more visible with you've got some science-based approach to Office 365, the solutions out there. I know that gets a bunch of attention. In fact, somebody actually last night was talking about having difficulty. I got to remember if I can find the tweet here, but having difficulty with his organization to get them to kind of move to the next stage. It says, I need to go refer to Matt's periodic table to find out, to explain where we are.
So the funny thing is, I'm an engineer by training, but I hate chemistry. But the periodic table is something that pretty much everybody has to learn at some point in their life. So I almost look at it as a bit of a propaganda tool. But Microsoft had their wheel. I mean, that was the way to go and explain that. And you had, I mean, the first thing I thought of when I see tools like that was back in the day, you had Sadie Van Buren created the SharePoint maturity model. And so that goes way back, if you're familiar with that. Back with end user, what was it? Trying to remember the site now, Mark Miller's site, endusersharepoint.com. That's what it was. Mm-hmm. And so she had shared it through there. And of course, I worked at one of my, on my team, Melinda Morales created the SharePoint governance maturity model, and where we do the same thing. But it's this idea of to go in, kind of assess where you are, and then understand, okay, here's what we still have to do in these different categories. It's a great visual way to go and figure out, to not get this myopic view of here's what we are, here's what we're doing. Oh, we're not taking advantage of these other things. So I'm sure half the people that look at that periodic table have no idea what those other products are and have never used it. I think so. I mean, I spent 6 years at a national lab. And we had SharePoint 2007 for a number of years, then 13, but we were air-gapped from the real world. So I didn't even know what Office 365 was until about maybe 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
When we were looking to, my new job at that point was looking to either upgrade to 2016, or we already had 365 licenses, so it was like, why not? Now, we were in St. Thomas, which was just ravaged by a hurricane.
Yeah.
So one of the few systems right now that I know is still up and running for them if they need to use it is SharePoint Online, because we got basically built-in disaster recovery. We didn't have that prior. So there was a lot of learning for that, because when I became a SharePoint admin there and then migrated to 365, I was no longer a SharePoint admin. I was a 365 admin. So I owned all these new systems that I may not have really, expected. So when I was trying to figure out how to explain that to people, putting it into some sort of graphical format, because regardless of what people say, everybody's a visual learner to some extent. Right. That wheel was such a great start, and I started seeing that at clients in my current position, and I'm like, that looks good, but it seems sort of arbitrary, and it's because nothing is grouped together.
Right. It doesn't provide the detail. You're right. It doesn't show the relationship of the various tools and get people thinking, because it's funny if you even go back and part of my background working with software configuration management and working in the rational software world, you had this idea of UML was this way to kind of visually annotate your models, your actors, the use cases, the scenarios around that. Obviously, it's not as complex as going and building use cases and scenarios around that, but that's kind of that's how people understand that. Okay, I understand the components. Now I understand how these two tools work together. Well, now I can start to see this end-to-end chain of solutions. And that's why solution sales, for example, has picked up a lot of steam, where instead of feature-based sales over the last few years, so that people can really kind of understand and visualize that end-to-end. Here's how it works together. Here's how you actually go and complete your job using these tools.
Yeah, and I'm very much an end-user kind of guy. I like to say that I'm a hand-holder extraordinaire of either helping people through the door or dragging them through if necessary. And that chart was actually really meant to be something to help end users, like every day, the accounting guy, the guy in finance, the person in marketing, the communication specialist, who just understand, like, this is what the waffle stuff is that's being thrown at me. It's turned out that I've used it in a lot of IT pitch sessions too, so that the rest of the IT department can understand what they're signing up for, because they get a lot of new services.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's worked out really well so far. And
I'm actually working on a dynamic version in the background so we can support translation significantly better. So it's I'll put that out there in the next few weeks or so probably. But yeah, I'm glad that people have found it useful.
Yeah, and for those that too, he referred to it as the waffle, and so that might be unfamiliar lingo there for some. But
the word I use.
Yeah, well, that's what I use too. But it's so the app launcher up there at the top left corner that have all your apps behind that. But it's referred to
Start menu in the cloud.
Right. So the waffle. It's funny because I'll just do that and I'll mention that as well, and occasionally people kind of.
You're just making them hungry. Yeah,
right.
I get it.
It's funny too. Before I've also heard it was referred to early on was like the hamburger, but I think the waffle is just short, sweet, and but still food based. So yeah. So we're talking about teams. Let's jump over to that topic. So I mean, you guys are using it. You're talking a lot about it. What's your experience been? Hey, in the background.
That's the president.
Oh, okay.
One of the other co-founders.
Yeah, right. So I think Mick is the one to be credited / blamed for pulling us into teams at this point. So I'll let you jump in on that.
Yeah, what's the story there? Yeah.
Well, I'm a big fan of, we kind of started on the whole SharePoint scene back in SharePoint 2003, treating it as a platform for solution delivery. One of the things I was going to chime in as well on the services side of Office 365 is there's a no-code story there as well that starts to get told a little better with your periodic table as well when you're talking to maybe developers or still on the technical side as well, but not maybe from an operational standpoint. And, tying in various services together to produce solutions, we are able to do more before we start talking about, okay, when do I start writing code deploying to Azure that extends all this stuff? There's so much more we can do before we have to start doing those things. So what was InfoPath, and even SharePoint Designer was kind of on the cusp, but like InfoPath and SharePoint configuration is now combining Planner with Flow, with SharePoint, with possibly Teams in this case, and those kinds of things. So it's melding all those things together. So that being said, one of the things we've been talking about and we manifest via this periodic table is this idea of let's first start with how much can we automate, how much can we improve your business processes using what you get from Office 365, just configuring it, utilizing it, and using the tools like Power Apps, Flow, Power BI, those big three in tandem with maybe SharePoint, with Dynamics 365 to create effectively applications, solutions, systems within their environment that actually manage their data and automate it in a way. While doing that and while basically kind of coming up with messaging around that, we decided, hey, why don't we take a look at this Teams thing? I'd actually used Slack in the past with colleagues and friends outside of our organization, not for work-related reasons, more for just kind of hobby type stuff. But that kind of exposed me to this idea of persistent chat. And it's very quickly understandable how different it is from Skype and email at the same time, and in the place it sits somewhere in the middle. So then Teams comes out, we started playing with it, and we just kind of decided one day, it's like, hey, why don't we kind of dive in on this? Let's establish some teams and some channels in those teams that identify basically all the various work-related work streams we have, areas of time that we're putting, those kinds of things. And we're a small group too, just like Christian, I think you said 5. We're about 15 over here, but from a biz dev capture standpoint, we're really talking 4 or 5. And then we've got other folks who are just out in the field. And so now we still engage with them at some point, but as you can imagine, we try to take a lot of the heavy lifting early on before we start engaging with them because they've got things to do. And they're out there effectively being billable since, got to make money as a company. So we basically just started using it and realized very quickly.
We were really doing 2 at the same time at one point. We started playing a little bit in Teams, and it was like, all right, this is sort of getting out of hand because we were emailing because that's what we were used to in one direction, and then we were starting to play with Teams. And like my argument for Teams is, I kind of get people pushing back on, well, only the new generation is going to like this. And my comment to that is, well, ask your parents, ask your grandparents, how do they feel about persistent chat? Well, they've never heard of that. Yes, they have. Have they ever used iMessage? Have they ever used Android Messenger? That's exactly why. That's how they communicate with their friends and family. And if they dislike it so much, why aren't they emailing each other back and forth? They generally do not, right? So the adoptability of it just was so clean and so I guess, natural. And then Mick goes, oh yeah, by the way, it does file management, and it has all these other tabs. You can bring in web pages, you can bring these other apps in, and it's like, oh, this organizational process is pretty sweet.
Right. Right. And I think some of the things that just started to happen organically, but quickly, that was probably one of the things I noticed was how quickly it started to take hold, we immediately started segregating email traffic to external. Yeah, it was very quick and very natural, where we just started communicating internally. A couple of things that help with that. Persistent chat with the mention concept, where notices to folks happen when you mention them. It's very easy to do, and it's very easy to pick up and understand, oh, this is important to me. I've been mentioned in it. I need to go look at it, those kinds of things. Right. And then the mobile app. The mobile app's really, really good on iOS, on Android. I don't even know if they have a Windows Phone one, but that's okay.
On everything. I mean, so I'm a Mac user at home. I'm a Windows user at work. I have an iPhone. Like, it's funny. I'll send a message out here. I'm not in the office all that often, so the fact that this is so mobile friendly is such a big deal. And I'll send a message and I hear like 4 phones in the office ping because they're all getting that message, and it's equivalent to a text notification. And I don't even have Mick's phone number because I don't need Mick's phone number.
Well, that's actually a problem now, is that I remember my wife's phone number, no one else's phone number at all. And all I know is I remember like my last password. And then my wife's phone number is like the two that I'll know. Yeah. And I know my social security number. That's good. But you're right. It's it's interesting. There's a line of conversation that's going on now. Feedback up in user voice to Microsoft, where people in the field are providing feedback around Teams, and there's a lot of feedback around. Look, there needs to be, I would say, more granularity in the notifications around that. But I was thinking about, like, one of the big complaints is that the method of like following a channel and getting alerted on it, it's not sufficient for some people's needs. Like, it's perfect for me to get what do they call it? The term where it's the notification with the highlight, the bolding of a a channel or text around that. Like, I don't need to be receiving texts or emails based on conversation in a channel that I'm following inside Teams. Maybe some people do need that. But part of it is, I think now, as people are experimenting too, you do have to be careful that it's changing a lot of the way that we're looking at that method of working, reducing email. This then becomes our primary way of keeping up with what's going on. Is I think people are going to find that those requests for getting all messages on anybody breathes on a channel of this activity, I get all these notifications. It's going to be overwhelming with the number of teams and channels and inputs that you're going to have, that you're going to want to tamper that down a bit. But I don't know how that is working out for you guys. I mean, for now, I mean, I have the way I have it set up for my organization is that we have a team for our channel, our internal only channel conversations. Of course, we're waiting for it to be refined and out there in public, the external sharing capability on those things. But in the meantime, I've got teams that are set up for specific customers where we do have outside interaction through these tabs, and where we've given external permissions access via SharePoint, like that side of things. And so I'm just being careful of what information we share where. But I mean, how, as you guys are looking at adjusting from the old way of doing things into this new, looking at the way that alerts and communications, notifications work, the way that you have to think about who do we have access to, who are we giving permissions to, how are you interacting, how is it different now interacting with external users? These are kind of all the topics that are going on right now. How are you guys looking?
So right now, I would say we're probably a good example of keeping it simple in that phrase, as far as the line between external and internal. It's email and Teams for us. So right now, and actually there's a really nice thing to that, is that, and where I was going with the mobile thing too, is, I'll get my little notifications on my phone. I can visually see, oh, it's an email versus a Teams message. It's internal versus external. Super, super simple. Over time,
I guess I didn't acknowledge that in my head, but I knew it naturally. That's true.
And I know that I won't be getting junk mail in Teams, which is awesome.
Not yet.
Not yet. Fair.
You working on some dastardly plan over there?
Just somebody's going to attach something to a bot they create or something. I was experimenting like one of the initial bots, like the kayak, and going out there and doing that, and it's one of those things where I can't get any use of it. It's just coming back with that's a different story around that. But why couldn't they just go and then attach something that then that's actually a concern of security around that model. I know that's a completely different topic, but I'm just thinking out loud and how that might actually happen now that I've scared everybody.
There's some really interesting things. User voice, the team's user voice, A, very, very active. And B, there's two things that I think have already been communicated by Microsoft as things they're working on. Private channels, which I think is really interesting. We already know external sharing is coming.
Right.
It's they're testing it. Right. Yeah, they're talking about it. Right.
Well, they're talking about external sharing. And then according to user voice, they're working on the idea of private channels. So it's basically right now, for those that are curious about Teams that are watching this, the structure of Teams is quite simple and elegant, but at the same time, because it's so simple, it can feel a little limited in that you'll have a team in Teams. That team will then have multiple channels, and your chat happens in the channels. Now, the chat can be threaded via what are called conversations, but basically, membership, who can see what.
Yeah.
There's goods and bads here. So the team is where the membership happens. If you have 3 channels in a team, everybody that's a member of that team can see everything in all 3 channels. Before going into what's about to change on that potentially, based on user voice, the nice thing about that now is contrasting to, say, email again, is gone are the days that you have to worry about CCing people. And also, if you add someone to a team, they immediately have available to them all the past information. So in a way, if they know how to get to it, they can basically get caught up. They can get informed about what's going on
without some major email dump of whatever the person that sent those emails decided was relevant to that recipient.
And it's in the context, the flow, that persistent chat that you can actually go and you can go and search and you can find topics and keywords and things like that, and then follow along and you can see what was said before and after around that. That's actually, look, you have Yammer as well, and that's actually for a lot of organizations. And the way that I use it with some of my customers is that I'll have Yammer access through a tab within a channel for that customer, and that will be the way that I'm interacting around those activities, and then can pull in, and so I could have an external group in Yammer, and so I could have that customer, and I could have their partners and vendors and all that through that view, but then it's only a tab away from the rest of the context of the conversation that's there in that channel within that team.
And you bring up a really good point of something that I think was naturally, it just started to happen, but it's happening at a very accelerated pace in Teams, is the ability to integrate other services, other communication streams, other data streams so easily, whether it's tabs, whether it's connectors, whether at some point it will be bots, is basically Teams lends itself really, really well because of many things. It's persistent for one thing. So unlike Skype, it doesn't just disappear. Unlike email, though, it's a little more fluid, and those kinds of things, you're not going to, it's easier to hone in on a certain place where that kind of data comes in. So for instance, Christian, the example you gave, you've got the Yammer feed coming in, but that's coming in on a particular channel.
Right.
So you can effectively step away from it by going to another channel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you need to be in that mode, you need to see that data, you need to be in it, you just go to that channel and it's all right there.
Yeah.
You can throw a tab in there that's tied to Dynamics, tied to Power BI, tied to whatever it is, to get at that data that way as well. So there's a lot of different options, but at the same time, it's really not that many options. It's nice and simple.
Right. But I do like that you're right. And I'm looking forward to more other solutions, other vendors to come in and say, look, we want to have more than just a web-based link, a URL, or sorry, in a channel. A tab is essentially like a browser just opening up another window there, and you can then look at these external services through there. And so there is a way that you can, just in using Yammer in that way, there's no real integration other than it's just pointing to URL. And you can have other channels that are pointing to that same conversation depending on the needs there. What is the next step to that, however, is then having the connector. So there's some information where you have a two-way into the news feed of the conversation there in that channel. or even in the, so through the channel, so that you can, again, have the connector on different channels. So if that conversation, that Yammer group, or that third-party tool is relevant in multiple channels, you can point multiple teams, multiple channels to those same resources. But you want to have some of that capability native in the application and kind of, ubiquitous throughout that experience. And then others, like, I don't want to, you guys are on my team at a different location. I don't want to bog you down with conversations with the project that you're not participating in, with these other vendors that are specific. You'd have the ability to go more so now with teams than ever before, to really go and create that space that is relevant to your project, to your sub team in an organization, to the external conversations, without, again, bogging down everybody else with all this other stuff that's not relevant to them. It's relevant for my project, relevant for my team.
Yeah, I'm with you on the, so I think one of the hindrances right now, and I think it's going to be for a while, is just the fact that Office 365 groups in general, the basis of a team, which is the basis of an Outlook group, which is the basis of a Yammer feed, are very confusing. So in addition to the periodic table, I put together a graphic on how groups worked, because I did not understand it, and I had to do research through so many different disparate locations. And once I drew it out, I sent it out to a couple MVPs that I trust, and I'm like, can you please review this and tell me if I'm wrong? And I got a couple back that were contradictory, so I actually had to look them up to make sure, nope, I'm right. Because I did not fully understand it. And the big confusion, because you mentioned you can bring in a Yammer feed into a Teams channel that you have going on, and you're sharing documents to your SharePoint team, or the site collection that comes with the group, I'm assuming, or with the team. So which apps actually come with external sharing? So not all of them do. How much access can you have to Outlook? That kind of thing. So I try to keep it simple. I've always been a proponent. So when I started in SharePoint, I was always a proponent of avoid object level permissions unless you absolutely can't avoid it, unless you just can't do it. I'm sort of the same on this one. It's I understand that membership and channels are different, and the private channel option is kind of nice, but the second that you break the bucket, you're starting to put complexity in that means that somebody literally has to manage it. And one of the best things about Teams is you can just give it to somebody new and say, here are your files, here are conversations, here are the topics of, in the channels that we're talking about. If you're the project manager and you don't need to know about the R&D process, never go to that channel. Just stick to the channel where the project updates are. So you can get into the weeds in some channels, stay high level in the other channels, and then the executives can stay in the even higher level. Here's just your dashboard, and it's a tab, and don't worry about anything else happening, behind the curtain kind of thing, which I think is great for the quick adoption and just getting people on board and going, because I think the conversation piece is just so much more natural in this as opposed to email. I put out a post about some of the surprising things that we found, surprisingly good things in Teams. And I think one of the biggest one for us was we agreed after a couple days, because we actually had a half-day workshop here where we're just okay, this is getting kind of crazy that we're in Teams and Outlook. Let's just figure this out. I'm also a big proponent of, I'm going to be consulting on this stuff. I should probably know how to use it. I should probably like it and not be selling a product I don't really believe in. And so I said, let's stick with this. Let's do it for 2 weeks. And after a couple days, we realized that the like button, the thumbs up, which on Facebook is great for when your friends, babies are born and sending, sentiments of joy. That is not a joy sentiment in our life. It is very much a, okay, got it, thanks kind of response, which how many emails do you get in a week that say, okay, got it, thanks, and it's a reply all, or is it just a reply? And it's just so much easier to see, almost like an audit trail of, all right, good. We know who read that, and we know what's good. So that's been really helpful for us.
Yeah. And the memes. The memes are pretty awesome.
Yeah, we have to. I've been working with a couple clients on getting into Teams right now, and I always create a playground channel for them so that they can learn and start, break, test, whatever, not real work. And they've been going nuts with the GIFs and memes. I never realized or didn't really think about the fact that that's what's going to get people in there first. And then say, okay, now go to your other work-related channels and stop using memes and GIFs there.
Right.
And it works because they're oh, okay, well, this conversation process seems so much more natural. I'm yeah, it's like when you text your kids, your friends or family, Right. So that's been good.
Well, it's funny you mentioned about the permissions at the object level, and it can be very much a transition for organizations that really come from the SharePoint world where you have that structure, and hey, there may be a need for that level. I've been in collaboration technology for over 20 years now. and since the mid 90s. And there was remember in 2000, what was it, 2001, the fall of 2001.
I was in freshman year of high school.
So so I was with a very, it was a VC funded startup to the tune of almost $200 million. Not a small little company we were building. And in our little collaboration platform, and somebody shared out the company, like financial information with people's salaries in a spreadsheet that was, that the 100 people who saw it should not have seen it. It should have been like the 3 people in finance dealing with that. Those kinds of stories, it was not SharePoint. It was, just to get that clear out there. But those kinds of mistakes, and there are reasons for having very granular controls over and locking down on content pieces and areas. But like you said, the model of teams, it's very flat. It's a lot of the security then is community. It's either self-managed, or you have this kind of community managed, this like the whole customer success model that was built out that came out of Yammer, I think applies to this as well, where it makes sense to have somebody who understands how the pieces come together, but then can kind of help guide people and nurture them as they make the transition over to this model. But otherwise, you're right. I mean, people have been using these things, these concepts. They should be familiar with them. And it's just a matter of then trusting that security model, trusting that, hey, I'm seeing only the things that I should be seeing. And if only 2 people should be seeing this, maybe I shouldn't be publishing that into this team, into this channel.
Well, I think as well, as it relates to teams versus, because really what you're speaking to is persistent chat as a communication model, right? As an information dissemination model. Because right now, if you try to say, well, I could have just sent this to everybody in email, right? And we'd say, well, we have controls in place for that now. A, you can't send to more than X people. If you try to use a distribution group, you might not have access to it. B, things like data loss prevention might even stop you from sending the email in the first place. The Office 365 Security Compliance Center, Azure Information Protection, a lot of those things might stop that. Some of those have play here too. So nowadays, that spreadsheet might actually have Azure Information Protection on it, and a fixed amount of people might even be able to look at it in the first place.
That's true.
That being said as well, I don't know exactly where it's at, but I do know that there's...
I would love to know what the percentage of the users of owners of 365 subscriptions, 1, use that, and 2, even know that that's an option.
Yeah. So just fair warning to everybody that's listening. I usually talk in terms of what it will be like in like 5 years. So I'm a futurist by heart.
Well, we're having my salary discussion after this then.
No, he just said you're getting a raise, but that's really in his mind, it's like 5 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
And one of the things we're gonna be hearing about very, very soon, if maybe at Ignite, maybe shortly thereafter, with how fast Teams is maturing, is how integrated it's going to be with things like data loss prevention, data retention, that information assurance, those kinds of things.
Because it's in its own wild, wild west status right now.
Well, and to clarify around that too, because that's one of the areas that I've worked for a long time around the SharePoint side, or around the governance and security compliance, auditing, kind of all those kinds of capabilities. Because you have a product, Teams, while it's new, I mean, it was architected on the back of other existing, technologies or leverage. I mean, they didn't go bolt things on. They started from the ground up. How would we go and build this? But leveraging the code of these products, but also a lot of the because it's able to leverage SharePoint and also Exchange, that it automatically utilizes a lot of that capability. So when you go in and look at the various threads, the conversations like out in the Microsoft tech community around these compliance and auditing security concerns that people have, a lot of it is in place. Not everything. There are big gaps, especially if you have my biggest concern is the few connectors that are being developed there. If I can't get notifications, if DLP and other security measures are not able to pick up content, conversation, or the indicators coming in through those connectors, that's kind of a big gap there, where it's not journaling them the same way, recording them, capturing them the same way as if we're doing the interaction right there inside of the team's native capability. That's
where Mick likes to push the envelope. He likes to go as far as he can before the product breaks, and I like to start as simple as possible and then let you grow as you go. So we find a nice happy point in the middle where it's like, all right, we can throw in some of these things that Mick has developed that are just, wow, that's super cool. With, all right, now I've got real world people that just want to use this thing, and if you can get that thing to work, that's great. But make sure that we can still meet the same. Like, you guys are probably fed up with me asking, okay, how does this impact security? Because that's always the biggest issue that comes up whenever I talk to a client. You know, like, is this going to be leaving Azure at all? Is it going to leave their tenant at all? Is it going to be going someplace else? So when we get into talking a little bit about some of the bot stuff that we're working on, I'm asking these guys, okay, where does this stuff go? Because if it ever leaves, you've just lost anybody that's in the cybersecurity realm potentially.
Right. Yeah. The government. Right. And that's kind of the next step of that, because that's for people to understand that too. And not that I have all the answers around the security aspect of that for the bot creation. But again, you're talking about the bots that are out there now that are available, that are public, are very simple. And it really is, because it's new, companies are figuring out what can we do, what should we do here. But people do need to understand what happens with these. These are passive, applications that are going out when requested out to the third-party service, and then coming back and retrieving information. It's very limited. Of course, if it's available in Teams, it has been approved through the bot framework. It goes through the rigor around that being accepted into the program and verified. But still, it's going out to that outside. Just the nature of how that works is going to limit it with certainly some, federal, state, local, government bodies, and how it can be used. But so what are you guys doing around bot development, and how are you answering questions around those kinds of things?
Certainly. So first off, what we're doing, we have developed, and we are going to be going live very soon with what we call Bizzy, the Bizzy bot. You can check out more about it at getbizzy.io.
Basically, stand up. You got it on your shirt.
Yeah, get busy.
We'll be at Ignite giving these out.
Yep.
And there you go. It's probably a little easier.
It's the softest shirt you'll see at the entire event. I'm just saying. Quite super nice.
So what we did was we kind of took we wanted to consider, if you look at all the bots, or most of the bots in Teams today, the bots that are in their little store that they have today, which again is changing as we speak. The concept of an app store is about to show up.
Yep.
Thank God. They are very commercially oriented, so it makes sense to use it for business. But I'm using Uber to get a ride, or Kayak to get travel.
Yeah, right.
That kind of stuff. Some of them are pretty interesting, like Poly. You can do things like
I use Zoom AI too.
Zoom AI and Poly for the surveys and those kinds of things that they do. That's pretty interesting stuff. Mm. So what we wanted to do was come up with a way. We've got a lot of enterprise customers. We do a lot of, especially work with the government, because we're out in the DC area. And so we see a lot of those more rigid organizational units where business processes are, they're internally unique to them. So we use things like InfoPath and SharePoint Workflow to automate those processes and those kinds of things. But there really isn't a one-size-fits-all for them. And so that's why those tools were built. The one-size-fits-all really is SharePoint, and they're just automating things on SharePoint.
Right.
So what we wanted to do is come up, think of bots in the same way, because at the end of the day, in Teams, which we see as very sticky, people are they want to live in it because it works really well from a communication standpoint.
And if it's true that this whole takeover of Skype, or rebranding of Skype, integration, whatever that word is that seems to have sort of leaked yesterday, is true, then there's going to be a lot of people forced into Teams soon that may otherwise not have been considering it. So there's a lot more eyes potentially that we found out about in the last 24 hours.
So, and what we've been talking about to date is things like connectors. Connectors are meant to inform the user. They communicate. It's a one-way communication. They tell the user, hey, here's some new information. So Yammer, for instance, you're getting Yammer posts into your Teams channel, for instance. Bots and tabs in a different way, but a similar way. Bots have the ability to actually receive input from the user and act on it. So it goes both ways. They can inform the user, plus they can actually take action on behalf of the user or do things for the user. And again, it's all in the name of automation at that point, right? So what we did was we came up with a bot that we're going to be launching soon that you can basically train it to whatever your business wants to do via Flow. So not only are we launching a bot, we're going to be launching some Flow connectors, and anyone can go into Flow, basically build out a Flow, starting with our initial trigger connector, assign it a keyword, and then once you publish that Flow, once you save the Flow, you can now fire that keyword against our bot, and he'll do work, whether it's in a private conversation or whether it's in a channel as well. And so it's this idea of an enterprise bot. We like to use that term, or an enterprise concierge type bot that you can teach it to do whatever your organization needs to do. And you've got this extensibility of Flow to basically allow you to customize the way it works to your business needs. This gives you now the ability to kind of weave in either data from the bot in a more sophisticated way. So the Yammer connector is a great example. Another version of that could be the bot via a Flow that adds additional business logic and filters what gets sent into the channel based on a command sent to it, as opposed to just a simple text search in Yammer type thing that the connector will give you, right? And so you get a lot more capability to hone what information comes into the channel and potentially actually take action on it from within the conversation. What we kind of see happening then is this leads itself really, really well to just really ease of use. It's a new form of interface computing, if you will. And potentially down the road, or actually probably as a matter of time down the road, Cortana is going to make an appearance, probably in Teams, in some way, shape, or form. Without getting into a lot of details on the bot framework side of things, there are signs that Cortana will have a business Cortana, or a Cortana for business.
The business thing might be going away.
Yeah, please let it go away. Let's go back to Cortana, Human Ear Edition Pro for education.
365.
Yeah, version 2, Service Pack 3. Yeah,
that's right. Yes, exactly. Perfect. But whatever that is,
yeah,
she's going to show up, and that's what I think that's going to do. Is that's going to give this idea of bots also an additional value prop.
Right. But with the news now that we had last week that Gig Jam was kind of being retired, and that for those that are familiar, which was, look, it was an R&D effort. I've always described it. I've done it in a couple different videos, set it out there live on stage as well. That the idea when I saw Gig Jam, which had the Cortana components of that, a lot of what we're talking about, the bots with the connectors, with the granular controls and permissions, and the concept of bringing people in to collaborate on something very specific for that time period, and then let them go back to doing what they're doing, but you got the information that you need in real time and pull us together. I mean, all those concepts, I always describe it as like NASA, putting a man on the moon. It's like not relevant to any of us day to day, but the ecosystem, the things that it created, what it helped, what they did, helped us very quickly innovate in areas that are impactful to us. So I can see things that were 2 years ago with Gig Jam, seeing that live on stage, Julia White's demo of that. I can see components of that now that are relevant and are starting to show up in these other technologies. And this is a great example of that. The other thing, just really quick too, for those, when we talk about bots and connectors and in the persistent chat and all those kinds of things, for some business users that may just eyes glaze, it just like, how is this relevant? And so I actually have a blog post half written around this, but to say that, in a team, in a channel where we have a project that we're working on with a customer, with a deadline and 30 days to go and do, and the conversation is really that thread, that persistent chat is that thread which we can come back to. If I'm going to sleep, you guys are 4 hours ahead of me. And I can wake up and see the conversation that's already happened that and get caught up. The connector, as you said, it's this one-way information where we have this third party, maybe we have a project management tool that is accessible in that channel through a tab, but it is as tasks are created and completed, it has the ability then in that thread to say, hey, this task that you were assigned to has been completed. So I'm not having to go jump over to a schedule to look at to see something's changed. I can actually just go to that conversation, the flow of that it was done, or based on a conversation using a bot, I could actually then call out the bot like, hey, at Bizzy, create a new task for Matt to go and complete by the end of next week around this. And so it's all happening within this flow. We could even be sitting there together having a conversation. Even eventually we could have a live.
Oh no, Cortana's listening all the time.
And then save it, capture it. It's journaled into that thread. So somebody, if there is a more in-depth conversation that needs to happen where text is not enough, we need to have the visuals, maybe you're whiteboarding behind you, but then it's saved and captured in the context to the conversation that we're happening. That's how those pieces work together. Information flowing in, the ability to go and make commands and stuff right there from that conversation in context, in flow. That's how these things kind of come together, at least in my mind. But hopefully that helps.
And to boil down what Mick was saying, so we talked about a number of the individual bots that are out there. Almost every single one of them is a unitasker. Okay, right. So Kayak has a bot that you get travel on. Uber has a bot that you get a ride on, right? Bizzy is a bot that is essentially just add water, right? So we did the bot work for people, because you will see a number of developers that are either SharePoint, O365 developers, whatever, are now starting to get into the bot sphere because, one, it's fun, it's new, exciting, and also will probably prolong their job security if SharePoint dev, for example, is less and less important as time goes on. So it's one of those things where we basically gave you the bread. Now you can put the sandwich meat, the condiments, and the vegetables in there, build the sandwich that you want. And you're not, because you're going to see a number of organizations where HR has a bigger budget this year for whatever reason. They need some money to spend, so they're going to steal one of the devs from IT and say, hey, do us a favor, can you make an HR bot for us at our company? Well, then let's say facilities ends up with that too. Any other sort of customer service organization internally, accounting, finance, things like marketing perhaps, might end up having 5 different bots. Well, we're providing the opportunity to say, here's one bot, and we did all the bot stuff for you. It's going to know the language because it pulls that through the language understanding processes. It's going to trigger off these business processes, which are really no different than building forms, right? But it's significantly more user-friendly because even InfoPath is a power user tool at its easiest level. SharePoint Designer workflows are also, you need to have some technical experience, and also I generally don't give SPD to almost anybody outside of a SharePoint team because it's just too risky, too many buttons that they can press they may not understand. But Flow has all these third-party connectors, so if you want to tell Bizzy, you want to teach Bizzy internally at your company, Bizzy, here's how to ask about getting vacation time off or getting your vacation budget back, or if you want to set up travel, if you want to put expenses in through Concur, if you want to check ADP and get your, right now, Flow's connectors there's a significantly larger number of connectors in Flow than there are in Teams. So the tabs in Teams are nice once they actually fully integrate. But the fact that Flow has Salesforce and MailChimp and Twitter and this is going to be a marketing person's dream. To be able to put that all into one wrapper and never have to leave it and then tell a bot. And actually, in a weird way, we're humanizing concierge services in a company because we're giving you sort of a human-based chat system. It's just there's not a person on the other side.
All I'm saying is that in the future, with the whole 12 monkeys scenario, when they come back and wonder how Skynet started, they may find this recording.
No, we're just giving you the platform. It's you that builds the flow. So if
you remove the people that built the platform that enabled that, you save the future. I'm just saying. I think watch your back as you're walking around.
Sarah Connor in the background, I guess. Was that her before?
I think to your point, and I think it's worth noting is how quickly now all of a sudden AI is just part of the conversation without actually being the conversation.
Right.
We basically just talked about something that's utilizing cognitive services and didn't even mention it because we just
assume that it's there.
Because it's been difficult for people to understand is because they've not understood the business application of that. And that's why you've got to be careful with in describing, especially to end users and to business users, where you say the words, bots and connectors, and again, it just you'll then lose them around that. And when you talk more around, of course, automation, and when you talk about it as that concierge service around any of those services internally, how your ticketing system will intelligently understand based on conversations to queue up and may even say, hey, do you need to open a ticket for this item, and ask you, and like, yes, it captures information, pre-fills in some of your forms based on what it learns from that. I mean, there's so much that you can do. You just need to talk about those things in that business language so people understand the application.
You could potentially not eliminate, but definitely minimize tier one IT support, because if you're hooking up to Zendesk and somebody asks a very frequently asked question, and Bizzy can go out, ping SharePoint or Zendesk for a knowledge-based answer with those keywords and come back with, I found these 3 options. Do any of these 3 fit for you? And before you can go on to talk to a person, you have to go through those to make sure or something, which as a user,
I know it's really annoying because the problem is that the vast majority of those systems don't have AI behind it. They're not getting more intelligent. They're reading from tables and lists. Yeah. And so they're more often than not helpful and frustrating. Yeah. But if there were intelligence there to understand, if the tool already knows, especially internally, knows who you are, doesn't have to ask you your operating system and version number, like it knows those things about your profile, and then can go take those actions that are more relevant to you based on what you've just been doing, where you are, service answers that it's already provided, that clearly you're asking it again. You don't need the same information that's already been provided. Somehow that wasn't the information that you needed. That kind of
mobile friendly out of the box. I can use the speech recognition through Siri on my iPhone to then translate that into Teams, and then Teams can then send that to Bizzy, and Bizzy can do what it needs to. I could theoretically be driving and request a SharePoint site.
Oh, we don't condone driving while you're.
I don't think there are laws specifically around SharePointing while driving. Not my state.
Yet. I mean, so I think also there's a good hybrid story that's worth mentioning here too. If you were going to connect the dots per se, a command through Bizzy makes its way to Flow. Flow is running in your tenant. Without going into a lot of details, you can build flows. It takes a little more work, but Flow is designed to have a hybrid story to be able to connect the hybrid systems. And that is not something that us as Bizzy are making those connections. That's your tenant talking to your internal system. And that's one of the beautiful parts about it. So all these stories we talk about, there could be hybrid components. And again, it doesn't have to be all hybrid or no hybrid. It's the mix of the two. It's whatever fits them. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, is give them that control.
And I'm super excited about the fact that he can go off and geek out on his super hardcore dev'd flows if he wants to. And then non-coders like myself and typical business users can be playing around with the drag and drop, GUI functionality of Flow and say, sweet, I just got my fob request form that every new person has to go through to be able to have access to the building. And I can tell Bizzy to please just make sure so-and-so has a fob on this date. And that can be triggered, done, bam. And all I had to do was say, hey, Bizzy, please do this. And as a business user, I could have just done that and automated most of my processes by spending maybe a week of time. And that would save how many man weeks in the future of wasted process running.
So getbizzy.io will be at Ignite.
Yeah, we're really excited. I think the whole democratizing of this is really cool.
I'm assuming that you have a shirt set aside for me?
Sure thing, yeah.
I will give you the shirt off my back.
Are you a woman small?
When I work out, because then I look ripped. So.
Perfect. Yes, you and me both, brother.
Well, hey, thanks a lot, guys. And how can people get in touch with you? I'm gonna add it to the video here. But what's the best way for people to reach you guys?
Definitely go to getbizzy.io.
Bizzy.io.
There's actually right now a free preview of the bot if they're interested before we go live. And then I think they can contact us from there.
Yeah. So if anybody's super technical and wants to sideload the thing and test it out, we're taking a bunch of feedback right now, so it's going well.
Very cool. Yep. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and thanks a lot for taking the time away from your busy day. Let you guys get back into it, get busy.
Busy day. Perfect. Yeah. Love it. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for having us, Christian.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks much. Cheers.